Hey, welcome back to the Car Doctor channel. I'm Tim. We're here at the repair shop of Donor Automotive in Anchorage, Alaska, and I appreciate you stopping by. Anyway, today I'm actually waiting for some parts here on a customer's vehicle. We got this 03 Dakota on the rack, and I thought I would just go over some of the common problems that we see on these rigs. Just off the top of my head, some of the things that we often run into, and especially with this vehicle, since we've identified a few problems common to these higher mileage Dakotas. This one actually has, I think, 130,000 miles. And a customer came in complaining of a HVAC blower control issue. They actually came here because they saw my video regarding the blower wiring harness and blower resistor and blower motor. So I'll actually put a link to that video. That's probably one of the most common problems we've run into with these rigs, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're a Dakota owner or even Durango or whatnot that you've run into similar issues. Anyway, I got a video about that. Should be real helpful. Anyway, let's just start at the back here. I got it up on the rack and show you some of the things we identified in this case. Here's right off the bat, the rear drive shaft U-joint. Rear shaft U-joint is emitting rust and a noise, especially when he's backing up. See if we can get a view of this here. The joint actually here in these little roller bearings is emitting rust, and the joint itself is fried. So we're actually doing front and rear joints on the rear shaft, and should be able to do that without, sending it to a driveline shop or anything like that. So while we're at it, we'll take a look at the front shaft, and we can also see rust at the front shaft U-joint area. It's in the beginning stages of failure as well. See a little bit of rust emanating from some of the roller bearings here on the front shaft. It's just at the beginning stages of failure and something that's going to need to be addressed at some point. We also see where the rear CV joint at this front drive shaft is bad as well. You can see with the rear joint that the boot at the CV joint is torn, and there's actually a little bit of play in there if we work it around, and which indicates that that joint's getting ready to fail, and that's going to be something we're going to need to look at here in the not too distant future. Anyway, checking the brakes, we see that the right rear brake pad is about completely worn out here on the inside, and the left rear is not. We might have about 50% remaining on the left rear. This indicates that the right rear caliper is beginning to seize up and burn that pad off. Could be the piston itself, or maybe even this slider type hardware in the caliper itself. Regardless, we're not a high rust area here in Anchorage, Alaska, so it's probably not due to rust, but more due to just general age and wear. We're suggesting in this case that the customer replace the rear rotors, calipers, and pads and bleed the system, which is what he's agreed to do. We checked the condition of the tires while we were here, and the tires have reached the wear indicators. They're basically completely worn out. Actually, the front tires exhibit some abnormal wear on the inside edges, indicating a front suspension issue, and we'll go up there and show you what we found there. While we're here though, the exhaust system looks like the original OE exhaust system, and again we're in a low rust area here. I just have no idea what you guys deal with in the rust belt, but this is the stock exhaust system, and it's doing quite well, so that's definitely good news. I'll go ahead and raise the front suspension here, and we'll take a look at the upper and lower ball joints. any signs of wear there. We've got a 4-post rack here with these rolling bridge jacks, just supporting the weight of the vehicle from the lower control arm. That'll allow me to shake down the front suspension and check the steering and suspension system for wear. Side to side here, looks like the tie rod ends are good. There is a little bit of leakage here from the steering rack and pinion ends. It's in the beginning stages of failure. Steering rack and pinions on these vehicles are common failure point. When they begin to leak fluid here, it's in the beginning stages of failure. Eventually this will become such a problem that you're unable to keep fluid in it. You're going to lose power assist steering and need to replace the power steering rack and pinion assembly. While I'm up here, I see the front shock absorber is leaking. That's lost the charge inside here from the hydraulic fluid leaking out. So it really needs front shock absorbers. But what's more concerning is that the upper and lower ball joints are completely shot. They look like the original equipment ball joint, but there's an excessive amount of play in them. We can see the play in the suspension system when I move the tire. The play is not in the actual bearing itself where the axle shaft goes through, but you can see there's movement in the upper ball joint, and then if I pry up under the tire, there's movement at the lower ball joint as well. Movement beyond the allowed amount of movement, which would indicate the need for replacement of the front suspension upper and lower ball joints. By the way, this is a 4-wheel drive vehicle, slightly different suspension than 2-wheel drive, but we run into the same issue on both 2- and 4-wheel drives with the need for replacing front suspension ball joints, generally speaking, between 110 and 150,000 miles, depending on the type of driving that you do. You can see the type of wear here on the inner side of this front tire, which would indicate that there's some type of a suspension system wear, creating that type of wear pattern on the front inside edge of the tire. So after the ball joints are replaced, we'll realign the front end, and then we'll go ahead and replace the tires on that. As you can see here, there's a very slight amount of leakage from the front stub axle on this side at the CV boot. That's probably not something we'd address at this point. We'd wait till that boot rips open and the joint fails, and before we really do anything about it. So other than that, the front brakes have some life left in them. The rotors are slightly warped and overheated, but we're going to probably try to milk a few more miles out of the brakes before we do anything there. That way we can budget for repairing some of those necessary safety components before we get to the other stuff that we could defer for now. As you can see here, the body panels exhibit no rust. We're in a low rust area, and I'm sure it's a lot worse in areas where there's corrosive agents applied to the road surfaces and whatnot. But generally speaking, the body panels and frame members are pretty resistant to corrosion over time, and being a 2003 year model vehicle, it's holding up pretty well as far as that goes. Another thing we'll talk about while we're down here is the fuel pump. It's mounted inside the tank, and that's a common issue probably around this mileage, so not uncommon to see one come in on the hook needing a fuel pump in there, and we always recommend going with the OE pump module on these. No sense messing around with any crappy Airtex parts. Since it's labor intensive to replace, go ahead and do it right now, and it'll serve you well into the future. Not as much of a problem on these as we see on a lot of the Chevy trucks. They tend to be a little more robust of a unit, but one downside is there's no external fuel filter. All the fuel filtering takes place in the pump module itself, and so they're prone to fuel system contamination issues with a returnless system like this. You want to make sure you've got always using clean fuel sources for these vehicles. They're very sensitive to contaminants such as water and particulate matter entering the fuel system. Over time, if you put contaminated fuel in this truck, you'll end up with some serious fuel injection system, fuel supply, fuel delivery system issues that you want to try to avoid. So always use good clean fuel sources. Differentials are fairly robust along with the drivetrain system. The transmissions are decent in these vehicles. We don't see a lot of these issues, but again, we're not a differential or transmission repair shop, so a lot of times these vehicles would go elsewhere for those type of repairs. But we don't see an uncommon large amount of issues with the differentials, transfer cases, or transmissions in these vehicles. Okay, let's talk briefly about some of the computer control systems and some of the codes that are common on these vehicles. They do have common problems with O2 sensors, evaporative controls. There are a whole slew of tune-up and drivability issues that are common on these vehicles. Some of the most common things we see is, for whatever reason, firing order problems, people doing distributor caps and rotors, tune-ups, and getting the spark plug firing order improper and coming back here with a misfire and then subsequent repair bill for identifying a mismatched firing order or whatnot. I don't know why. They're a little bit weird, the caps in the back, and sometimes a little hard to get things back the way they're supposed to be. Common codes are P0442. Can have problems with the evap hoses cracking over by the canister here, causing that code to set. Also the NVLD, or natural vacuum leak detection module, failing and setting those codes in the evap system, kind of a spendy part. Another common code we see is a P0176. That's associated with the governor pressure sensor in the transmission, causing a shifting issue and whatnot. That's not actually a bad fix. It's usually kind of a cheap part and pretty easy labor to square that away. We've seen that often. Also those P0138s and other O2 sensor codes. We see a lot of O2 sensors. I definitely would replace all my O2 sensors if I was getting over 80, 90,000 on this rig. They just tend to fail. So you'll have problems with the check engine light, poor drivability, fuel mileage decreased, or failure of an emissions inspection due to that. They're a relatively easy fix and inexpensive as well. I talked about this customer coming by with the HVAC blower control issue. That is a common thing that we've seen, and in fact in this case we see that the blower resistor wiring harness has been replaced. Odds are they put a blower harness on and a blower resistor and didn't replace the blower motor. And basically I got a video, like I said, about this. You definitely want to replace the blower motor, resistor, and the wiring harness with OE parts in this case if you want to take care of this problem. And even then you'd be lucky to get more than a few years out of it. Just a poor design. I wish they would fix it permanently, but oh well. So anyway, just a quick overview of the engine itself. There is a lot of oil leakage problems we see associated with the valve cover gaskets leaking. Definitely not uncommon. They do have intake leaks. We've seen that plenty of times. Water pump is a common failure point. It's a pretty easy fix. You want to get this bypass tube sealed up properly if you do a water pump on these. I think I got a video about that. Various engine sensors and whatnot, always on the fritz, but fuel system, like I said, you want to make sure and get clean fuel source all the time. Well, anyway, I probably missed a few things just off the top of my head while I'm working on this rig. You know, we're going to approach some of the major safety related issues and get those lined out on this vehicle. He's not going to repair everything. but we're going to make a dent in it and get this thing safe to operate on the road. It's totally worth doing. There might have been some stuff that's been deferred for a period of time, but we've given a general inspection, and the customer's going forward with a good knowledge of the condition of the vehicle and necessary maintenance. And again, we're taking care of some of the major safety related issues so we can get this thing safely back on the road. Hey, if you got stuff to add, common repair issues, go ahead and put that below. And again, you know, if we can keep these rigs on the road and save for a new car payment and insurance and all that, well, your money in the bank. Appreciate you watching the Car Doctor channel. We'll catch you next time. Take care.